Grad school, along with many other academic and professional spaces, wasn't built for first-gen and BIPOC folks like us. And yet here you are, navigating it all, often without the adequate support you deserve. That's why I created Office Hours with me, Doctora Yvette, a budget-friendly, high-impact coaching and consulting space designed specifically for first-gen, BIPOC, and or neurodivergent grad students, postdocs, and early career professionals. It's a 50-minute small group drop-in session where you can ask me anything about productivity, imposter phenomenon, burnout, setting boundaries, grad school apps, funding and financial literacy, career development, and more. You can even stop by and just have me chat it up with you about a recent podcast episode if that works for you. You'll receive strategies and a supportive space to figure things out together. Spots are capped at 8 participants to keep it intimate and interactive and to make sure I can answer everyone's questions. Sessions happen twice a month for a limited time. To be honest, I'm not sure how long I'll keep this offer available. So sign up now at the link in the show notes and let's get you the support that you deserve. Welcome to the award-winning Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on inclusive grad school stories and learn about personal development and productivity tips. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Vu, a certified coach, consultant, and author, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with insider knowledge to help you reach your personal and professional goals. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette. Today, we are covering the topic of turning down a grad school offer. That's right, to pursue your own path as a freelancer and digital nomad. Our guest is Dianni Hall, and she is a queer solo budget backpacker, second-gen Latina, and digital nomad who has been living a nomadic lifestyle for nearly 6 years. Currently, Dianni is a freelancer specializing in podcast production, having launched her own podcast while she's away in 2020. So check it out. On her show, she interviews women about their travel experiences and expertise, aiming to inspire others to live their best lives while exploring the world. She also currently works for 2 podcast production companies while simultaneously managing her own clients and sharing her travel adventures on her own social media channels. Dianni's passion for travel has driven her to see much of the world, and she is excited to share her knowledge and experiences with you. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Dianni.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and I'm really thrilled about our conversation today.
Me too. I don't even know how I discovered that you had gotten into grad school and didn't go. And I was like, wait, hold up. How come I haven't interviewed her? So I'm excited to have you here. And actually, before I even knew that, I had been interested in reaching out. I just hadn't followed up because this happens to me all the time where I want to invite people and then I get a little shy.
Yeah.
Primarily because I know a lot of folks who still desire to travel actually, it's 2025. I know a lot of folks who want to just GTFO.
Yes.
And so I think this idea of whether it's traveling for fun or it's pursuing a different lifestyle, a lot of folks are interested in, like, how do you even go about that? And so I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about you, about your backstory, and how you got to where you are today, which I also know because I follow you on socials, that where you are now has also shifted.
Yes.
So if you're comfortable sharing a little bit about that.
I was going to say, I was like, that bio I
too.
sent you is a little slightly, maybe a month or 2 outdated.
Let's get that update.
Yeah, we got to get that updated so I can share about that first. But I was digital nomading for 6.5 years and am now based in New York. It's very fresh. That's why I say a very recent change to that bio. I moved in as of January, but it's the first time I'm kind of signing a lease. Not the first time ever in my life, but the first time in some time. I had lived in Spain for a while as an English teaching assistant, and I think that was maybe the last time I had roommates or was signed on a lease. But I also I'm still freelancing. I actually just recently brought in a freelance client. But on top of that, I'm starting a full-time job on Monday
Wow.
as sales operations coordinator for Ad Large, still in the podcasting space, just more now on the ad sales side of things. So a little bit of a pivot away from production, but still working with some great individual clients that I really enjoy working with. And yeah, so there's some updates there to my bio.
Yeah, I kind of want to ask, like, what was the impetus behind your decision after spending so much time
Yeah.
away and, moving around to settling down? It sounds like that's a decision
Well,
to be at least more settled. You signed
yeah.
a lease, so there's at
Yeah.
least a year,
Yes, exactly.
and you accepted a full-time job. There's some sense of rootedness there. So
Yeah.
if you're comfortable sharing what led to that. And actually, maybe too, because I'm curious about going back to your experiences, like as a student in college. So I don't know if it makes more sense to you to say it chronologically, to tell us a
Okay.
little bit more about your backstory in terms of your college experiences. So many of my listeners are college and grad students,
Yeah.
and then transition us into fast forwarding. Okay, you did your thing for several
Yes.
years, and now you said in New York?
New York. Yeah, in
Okay,
Brooklyn.
yeah. So now you're in Brooklyn and starting to settle down a little bit more.
Yeah, no, happy to share chronologically. I think that, like you said, makes more sense. So to go way back, I was the first of my family to go to college and graduate. So, like we were discussing before we hit record, and I'm first gen in that way. My dad came to the US when he was 15 years old, and I think had stopped going to school a bit before that to work. So, probably doesn't have anything higher than like a middle school or early high school education level. Mom had me at 18 and so finished her education quite early as well. And I think had tried while I was growing up to get her associates, but just wasn't able to. So, yeah, I think there was a big push in my family for me to be the one to, like be able to live out that kind of American dream. And that was part of the
Mhm.
reason my dad was here, to give us that ability. And so it was kind of a no questions asked. I'm the oldest of three. And so with me specifically, it was like, you're gonna go to college. That's the route. And at that time I was really excited to pursue psychology and I wanted to become a therapist and get my LCSW, become a licensed clinical social worker. That was kind of the path I was on. So I went to William Patterson University right out of high school, and it was closer to home. And 2 years into that, pursuing a bachelor's in psychology, I switched universities to Monmouth University in Long Branch in New Jersey as well. They had a much better like psych programs, and I was also looking to get away from home a little bit. So being an hour away was nice. And I was really in this. And so I was determined to like, work with great professors. And we were doing a whole, I had to do a whole like, I can't think of even the word now, which is crazy. I'm so far removed from that time of my life, but a whole like research experiment at the end of our time. We were
Yeah.
conducting research, our thesis,
Yeah,
research, like a
yeah.
thesis.
Undergraduate thesis,
Yeah,
perhaps, or
there you go.
capstone project. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. So we were conducting, research and I had really great professors. And then came the time for me to start applying to grad school. So I had it all kind of laid out. I was like, I'm finishing up my bachelor's. I finished at 21, 22. My parents were thrilled, even though I had a mountain of student loans. I was still really excited about the fact that I'd done this thing, and I applied for grad school. So I applied to a bunch of different schools. I'm almost positive I got into all of them, and they were all within New Jersey. And I had decided on Rutgers. So I was going to go to Rutgers for my MSW. That was the plan. And I had gotten in. I had gotten my internship settled. I don't remember exactly where, like I said, so far removed, but I'd gotten my internship selected and approved. I had picked my classes for that first semester. I was like deep in it, ready to start. And I don't remember what exactly happened, but at some point, something shifted when I realized that like I was going to be doing my master's for the next 2 years. And then I was going to have to do like clinical time. And then like I just was looking at the process ahead of me and how much of the rest of my 20s it was going to take up, basically. And I remember looking at all of it and being like, okay, by the time I'm ready to be like a practicing therapist at some point, I'm probably going to be, 28, 29, which at the time felt so far away. And now being 28 going on 29, it's like I still would have been so young, but it just felt so far away. And I had the kind of question of like, do I want to spend the rest of my 20s doing this? And also, I was, you know, completely self-reliant and completely self-dependent. So I was going to have to work my way through my master's as well while going to school full time. I had a part-time job, but it wasn't really enough to like be able to take care of myself and like supply my basic needs while going to school full time. And then an unpaid internship, which at the time, I don't know if that's changed, but the internships were required to be unpaid, which I found kind of ridiculous because we're master's students and we're not like, I'm not living off mommy and daddy's money and don't have the means to just dedicate 20 hours a week to an unpaid internship. So I think all of that kind of hit me. And I was realizing like, this is not going to be sustainable. It just wasn't going to be something that I was able to sustain. So really last minute, I put it on pause and I kept nannying and picked up other nannying gigs and was just like, okay, if I'm not going to do that right now, what am I going to do? And I had always wanted to travel through high school from when I was young. I remember wanting to do a study abroad in high school, and I went to the conference and I'm sitting in the room with all the other people and there's this big presentation and they're like at the end of it, okay, this is how much it's going to cost. And I'm like, well, I can't afford that. And I think being a first gen college student, I didn't. So then there's all these different ways that I had wanted to travel, just never worked out. And now it's like, okay, if I'm not going to do my master's, I'm going to save up for a year and I'm going to go backpack. That was just the plan. And so I remember telling my family that I was going to go to India instead of doing my master's. And they were kind of like, what do you mean? I can remember them being still fairly supportive in that, like, whatever's going to make you happy was kind of what I was hearing from them. But there was definitely still confusion, fear around my safety. No one had ever traveled that far within our family. And yeah. And to summarize the past 6 years, I went to India, was in Southeast Asia for 4 months. So India, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos. I was completely addicted. I was completely hooked. I just didn't even know. There was just so much that I hadn't known that I had been exposed to now that I was like, I just need to see more. And that kind of kept being the motivator to continue. That led me into, okay, how can I get to other countries? And then I taught English in Spain. And then I was nannying and au pairing and teaching, just doing all the things, and tried to figure out how I could make money while traveling, which led to freelancing and still traveling. And now 30 countries later, I am 28 and craving a little bit more stability and daily routine, the ability to maintain routines, maintain community, maintain my physical health, and really ground down somewhere in a way that I haven't allowed myself to in the past several years of my life. And so I'm still very much in love with travel and planning trips for this year, but I think it'll all look a bit different as I'm like navigating this next chapter of life. And that's a long-winded version of my story.
I am so glad that you shared everything that you shared from your first gen experience of like, I'm going to do all the quote unquote right things. I'm going to pursue undergraduate research. I'm going to apply to all these grad programs. I'm going to be so good that I'm going to get into a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like when you were accepted, you did that deep introspective work of figuring out what do I actually want?
Yes.
And what's actually going to make sense for me? And that's something that, a lot of my listeners know I don't recommend grad school for most people.
Really? Yeah.
And when folks do decide that it makes sense for them, when they're looking at programs, it's about the holistic considerations, not just what do they offer in terms of research and in terms of specializations and in terms of rankings. It's like, no, what's going to
Yeah.
work for you?
Yeah.
Location, budget, funding, the demographic, safety, all that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, in your case, sounds like, yeah, I'm glad that you had that time, that you were willing to be so bold to go for
Mm.
what you want and to lean into your curiosity that brought you to India and then 30 countries, more countries than years you have been on this planet. Now, that needs to be in your bio, by the way.
Yeah. I really appreciate you saying that because I, at the time, didn't even realize that's what I was doing. I think I just had looked at it kind of matter of factly and I was like, this isn't sustainable. And yeah, and then after realizing that like I couldn't do this, like what do I want to do? And having the opportunity to ask myself that question. And it's interesting you say that too, because I remember thinking like, I'm not going to do my master's, but you know, I can still show my parents that I did my bachelor's and nobody else has done their bachelor's. So I still have something to like show them. And so it's
Yeah.
still, even in me saying that, it's like, because this was the only option that I thought I had. This was the only like there was the only way. I didn't even know not going to college was a thing that I could do because it just wasn't in the conversation. It was like, where are you applying to? Not that I was getting any help with applications, but it's like, where are you going to go? Where are you going to go to school? So it was just so like expected of me that I guess when it came to deciding not to do my master's, that I was like, okay, well, at least I did this for my parents. I did my bachelor's and feeling like I'd checked that box in some way for them.
Yeah. A lot of us who are first gen can relate to that feeling of wanting to do something for our family or for our community because they didn't have that same level of opportunities or
Yeah.
privileges that we have been afforded. And at the same time, you are like when I see you showing up as your full self. You are queer, Latina, first gen. We're talking about whether you're first gen, second gen. I'm the very least person in college. Let's call you 1.5 in the US. And I would love to hear more about that, about your identities, about your positionality, about like how these identity markers that you're so your full self and proud of showcasing them. Not everybody feels safe enough to do that. How
Yeah.
have these identities impacted your decision making around your career and your life? And I say career and life because it sounds like they're so deeply intertwined.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, I'm a freelancer and that's the career, or oh, I'm now working in podcasting. Instead of thinking, I feel like most people think career first then life. You were thinking life first then career. But correct me if I'm wrong. That's just my interpretation of it.
No, you're absolutely correct because I think I entered into freelancing as a means for me to be able to continue to live the life I was living. I was not career focused at all. I was like, well, I know how to manage a podcast because I know how to manage my own. Maybe I could get some clients. And I started and I was like, okay, well, this is a thing that'll be able to fund my ability to continue traveling and I can be wherever I want and I'm not tied to a location. And, even now it's still an important factor to me. And like, I'm working a full-time job, I'm about to, but it's fully remote. And I remember in that initial interview, I was like, can I still travel? Like, are you cool with me traveling? And they're like, yeah, we're not going to micromanage you. You can go wherever you want. I'm like, okay, sick. So even now, it's still important to me. And I think I've ingrained that in myself from that young age of 21, being like, I'm going to go do this thing that I want to do. And everybody else is getting their master's or starting a full-time job outside of their bachelor's or prioritizing, family or getting married and like all of these next steps that we're told we're supposed to follow. And I decided not to do that. And that has just sculpted the way that I approach life now. I was having this conversation with my partner recently of like, what are you the most afraid of in life? Like, what's your biggest fear? And hers being regret. And mine was just like not living the most full life I can possibly live, truly.
Wow.
And what does that look like? Even when I'm grounded here, maybe I'm not in Spain or in Colombia or wherever, but it's going out and making friends and getting to as many events as I can get to and participating in as many things as I can participate in, and taking advantage of like living in Brooklyn, living in New York, and living that to the fullest as well. So that's what that means. And I think it's in every aspect. And I think, like you asked my identity, how that ties into it, I think part of it is being like, I'm grateful to the US has its issues now more than ever, but grateful to have been awarded opportunities that I know my father or my mother weren't. And my mother, even being born here, wasn't given the same opportunities, And so being grateful that like they really set me up for an opportunity to be someone who had the opportunity to get an education, pursue like a career in the way that I've been able to pursue a career, and not just, get a job to make ends meet, but like be able to be independent. And that's not something that, my dad recently was like, all of the friends that I had back in Guatemala when I was growing up, like, are dead now that are my age. Like, they have not survived life. And I know that I would be in that same boat if I hadn't come here. And so that there's like that basic level of gratitude that I think probably plays into my desire to like live the most full life I can live. And I think in terms of being a queer person, that hasn't always been something that's been a struggle of its own. Growing up in a super Christian family, that even still now to this day, it's not something, it's still a struggle for me in family spaces. But I think over those same years of me just exploring and getting to know myself in all these contexts of traveler and making it work in other countries when I had no money, but I'm dependent on myself, and like learning how to really like live, I've also in that same time stepped into my queerness and have embraced it so ferociously, because why am I going to spend my life hating myself for being queer, or like dealing with internalized homophobia? Because I see that on other people, and I see how upset they are with themselves or with life for having been born queer, for being queer, and they take it out on the people around them. We're looking at so much like anti-trans legislation in the US right now, and just all of this like viciousness against queer people. And I think one of the biggest ways that you can combat that is just to like ferociously be proud of the fact that you are queer. And I'm sorry that makes
Oh,
me emotional, but like that's why Pride is such a big event, and we take so much pride in being queer, because if we're going to be hated by everyone else, then who else is going to be proud of us but us, you know? And so like all of those things combined has just made me like, we're going to live it, and I'm going to enjoy it, and it doesn't really matter what anybody else like says or thinks about that. I'm going to enjoy this life, you know?
Wow, that was so beautiful. I got a little bit emotional too, because I have been talking to folks, behind closed doors and also publicly on the podcast too, about how this year has been really, really hard already.
Yeah.
We're recording in January, end of January. Y'all are hearing it a little bit later, but this was recorded earlier in the year. So we're still all kind of dealing with the shock of this administration, and then how fast things are picking up and how hard it's been. And I've been saying, like, if other people are going to be emboldened, then we too need to be emboldened in
Yes.
showing up as our full selves. So for me, it's, how do I show up as an ally or as a comrade, and also as my full self in the ways that I too feel different
Yeah.
or different from whatever is normative in my autistic, like just showing up and saying, I'm autistic. I'm
Yeah.
neurodivergent. I have chronic illness. And what? Like,
Yeah.
it's just part of
Yeah.
my reality. And also, I have privileges too. And so I can use, at the very least, this space as an outlet to amplify the voices and the stories that matter to me. And that
Yeah.
includes the queer community, that includes LGBTQIA plus, and anyone else who has been oppressed in some way, shape, or form in this country, and
Yeah.
also globally, because this is like a microcosm of everything else that's going on in the world right now. So I really felt that emotion. I saw the tears. I know we can't see the video right now, but like
Yeah.
I saw your tears. I feel that the intense care and love that you have for yourself and for the communities that you're part of. And I appreciate that because, like you said, some folks are not comfortable showing up as their full selves. Some folks dream of living a life like the one that you have been living. They
Mhm.
dream of not pursuing that graduate school path. They dream of not doing the thing they've always been done because they don't know how to do anything else. And
Yeah.
you have this skill set of knowing how to pivot. And that's a big thing that not everybody is willing to do. Not everyone is willing to take that risk. So
Yeah.
I want to bring it back to this idea of like how you even make this lifestyle a reality. For you, it included your freelance career
Yeah.
and going specifically into the podcast production sphere. But I'm curious, yeah, how, like, for anyone else who wants to make this kind of pivot, how did you acquire the skills that you needed? Did any of them come from your time in
Yeah.
college? Did any of them come from other areas where you gained some, or did you learn on the spot? Like, how did
Yeah.
that come about?
I love this question because I think a lot of times people will hear this and be like, well, I don't have any experience in that, so I can't freelance or I can't do that or, and I will say, I didn't either, so that's not an excuse. If you're listening right now, it's like that is not a reason not to. And I think for a while, for a long time, that held me back. And I remember initially wanting to travel and being like, okay, well, my degree's in psychology. I only have experience because after college, I nannied. Like I had nannied for 8 years and that was where my skill set is. And that's not really something that's transferable into being able to travel and work remotely and digital nomad. So was applying to jobs that I could like work remotely and do with a degree in psych. And that wasn't really panning out. And so, like I said, I decided to do the English teaching assistant in Spain, which is a great program. I really enjoyed it. And it gave me kind of that jumping off point to be able to au pair and use the skills that I did have to be able to travel. But I will say, if you don't have the skills, that's the beautiful thing about skills is that they can always be developed and they can always be created. So I, before 2019, had only ever listened to podcasts and loved listening to podcasts. That's why I wanted to be in the podcasting space, but had never started one, had never done anything until I started my own. And I trialed and errored on my own. And I learned how to edit on my own. And I gained all these initial skills. Did I know how to manage freelance clients? Absolutely not. Did I know how to do any of the things? How to send an invoice? How to, where do I receive payment? How do you, like, so many things I didn't know. But I gave myself the grace, maybe looking back, wasn't so graceful, but like gave myself the grace and space to learn how to do these things. And so, if I think a lot of companies are remote, nowadays. So if you wanted to go the route of like using the experience you do have to get a full-time job, I can give you the resources. It's a travel OD. It's called. She's on Instagram. She helps people get full-time remote jobs and she has a lot of great resources like job boards for like fully remote jobs to apply to. But if you want to go the freelance route, I learned on my own project. So I would say like pick a space, whether it's copywriting, whether it's podcast management, whether it's graphic design, whatever skill you're like interested in cultivating, start cultivating that skill. Offer your services to friends for free so you can put those on your resume. Hey, I know you said you wanted to start a podcast. Can I, work on your cover art for you? Can I work on, sending out pitches for guests for you? Can I work on your social media for you? Find ways, or if not for someone else, do it for yourself and take the time to develop those skills. And then take yourself to Upwork. Upwork is one way to find clients. There are a slew of other places, and I created an Instagram reel about like different ways to find freelance clients. But there's like different newsletters. I'll share them with you. The names are escaping me right now. But go onto these platforms and look for opportunities and find ways to start, even if small, in really small ways. Start utilizing those skills with other people for still maybe like lower paid or unpaid work. And then I know you're probably thinking like, okay, well, like how am I supposed to sustain that if it's all unpaid work? There is a period of time where you are just developing the skill. So if you have a full-time job right now, or you're in school or whatever the case may be, if you can dedicate just like a little bit of time on the weekend or sometime to this, it will pay off because you're developing a skill that you can keep using over and over again. So at one point in 2019, 2020, I was only working on my own podcast, and now I do podcast marketing for one client. I do podcast production for another client. I do editing for another client. I'm getting a job at an ad sales company with basically starting with skills that I had just taught myself. So it's all possible. You don't need a degree for these specific skills to like, I don't have to go to school to learn how to do these things. They're self-taught, and there's so many resources online, and YouTube is a great resource. Just, it's a matter of taking the time to learn, offering those skills for free when you can at a very basic level, and then starting to look for actual freelance clients until you're able to work up the clientele. And I don't want to say this as a one-time fix for everything. It's stuff that takes time. It's stuff that's taken me years, but it's possible, like it's definitely possible if it's something that you want bad enough. And I think that was always the underlying factor of like, I really wanted to travel bad enough. Like I really wanted to make this work bad enough. I really wanted to keep traveling and work for myself and figure this out enough that I figured it out. And sometimes you just have to go through that messy middle figuring it out phase of life to get to the other side of it where you're like, oh yeah, I know how to do this, like this is easy, and be able to charge more or have the ability to like bring on higher paying clients because you've worked with smaller clients. You now have the reviews or the feedback and all of these things. And so yeah, it can take time to build, but it's totally doable. And a quick like technical note, if you are starting off freelancing and you're like, I don't know how to send an invoice, I don't know how to do any of that, Honeybook is a great resource. You can send invoices, proposals, literally everything right on there and get paid right through there. So would definitely recommend checking that out. But yeah, I hope that's helpful. I know that can seem vague, but that's really like what it takes, honestly.
Hi, FemTs. I'm gently interrupting the show to let you know that you can be a sponsor for the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. Whether you're a small business owner, a book author, or part of an educational startup looking to reach a loyal audience, this is your chance to showcase your work. My listeners are first-gen BIPOC college students, grad students, and early career professionals who value mentorship, education, and empowerment. If it sounds like a fit, head to the show notes to learn more about sponsoring an episode. I don't think that was vague at all. I thought that was very, very helpful. You start out by choosing an area, a niche, whatever you want to call it, an industry, etc., whatever it is that you're going to focus on. Then start out either offering it to friends for free or lower cost and pull enough gigs together that you start to secure more clients. And then from there, the more experience you gain, the more you can increase your rates.
Yeah.
Or even you can start to apply for full-time jobs where folks will take that experience and see that you have a whole portfolio of stuff that you've done. And that's how people do it. I've had several friends of mine who have pivoted. Actually, there's so many people I know who have left higher ed. I laugh because it's just, it's hard to stay in academia. The salaries are not great. And oh my gosh, I feel so bad for my loved ones who are still there because there's
Yeah.
so much going on in terms of grants potentially getting frozen or cut, etc. That's
Yeah.
a separate conversation. But going back to this idea of like, I know several people who have pivoted in their careers and how they started. They're like, Yvette, can I do a UX study of your website and provide you with some data to help you improve your website? I'm like, you sure? How much? Free? Okay, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or folks who like reach out to barter. Hey, if I offer this, can you
Yeah.
offer that? I'm like, yeah, let's trade. I'll provide you with some coaching services and you help me, with email marketing or whatever it is. So you
Exactly.
never know what you could do. And one of the things that I resonate a lot with as part of your story is this idea of wanting it enough.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship. I just quit my job during the Great Resignation because I was just like, this is not sustainable for me. I broke down and I was like, I can't keep doing this. And then I got this big idea to move abroad and live a slower life. And I was like, I'm
Yeah.
going to figure it out. I'm going to figure out a way to make ends meet. I'm just going to figure it out. And I moved abroad to Portugal and I had several similar reactions from family members of,
Yeah.
what are you doing? Like, are you okay? And also, I guess we support you, but we're also a little
Yeah.
scared for you.
Yeah. Necessity will make you figure out things that you didn't know you could figure out. Necessity, needing that income, needing to survive in another country, needing to bring in an income for yourself, it'll just force you to really figure out how to make this work because you have no choice. I think that's the times when your back is kind of up against the wall of like, this has to work because I don't have another option right now. And so you make it work.
And if you feel like you can, sometimes it's useful to remember that a lot of us come from a long line of ancestors who figured shit out because they had to. They had no other
Amen.
option. And we are currently experiencing a time where there's a lot of layoffs, where for me personally with entrepreneurship, it's very, very slow. And so guess what? I'm still trying to figure things out. I still have
Yeah.
to try new and different things. And why? Because this is what we do. Like when things hit the fan, we will figure it out. Lean on the whatever it is that works for you in terms of your
That resilience.
spirituality or your
Yeah.
religion, etc. Of like, what did you get from your ancestors and from whatever you believe is a greater power, if you believe in it, to
Yeah.
tap into that to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out.
But I'm gonna figure it out.
You're figuring it out too.
And now my dad too, it's funny because he, started a construction business and has been doing construction since he came here. And that's been like his whole, life. And well, we would joke about that as a freelancer. I'd be like, Dad, I didn't know how to send it. I didn't know what do you do when you onboard a client? Like, how do you, and he'd be like, Dianni, you don't know the number of times that I've gone to visit a potential client's home and they're asking me questions and I just pull it out of my butt because that's all I can do in that moment. And I think it's that he says it too, of like, you have that ability to survive, and that like, whether you've gotten that from me, whether you've gotten that from your mother, but you have gotten that from us in some way, of like, you have that ability to survive and figure it out. And he'll say like, I'm so proud of you for getting to the point where you are now. And I think in that same vein, it's like, yes, we have that ability to survive. And I've done that for so long. But I also think we deserve the ability to rest and the ability to feel joy and calm and let our nervous systems relax and not feel like we have to forever. And so I think there's always a time and a place for it. Yes, hustle until you get to where you want to be, but also remember to allow yourself time to rest, because there's been so many periods of burnout or exhaustion, or I've taken on too many clients and I can't manage it all and I'm working 10, 12-hour days. There's two sides to this, because I don't want you to be like, I listened to Dianni on the podcast and then I'm, now here I am and I'm like, overworking myself. There's always bounds to it, but like, yes, you can figure anything out, but also know when you deserve rest, because for our ancestors as well, in that same way, that they've learned how to hustle, we know how to hustle, but we also deserve to rest in a way that they were never given the ability to.
We also deserve to experience more moments of joy. And
Yeah.
that's the other thing, too. Our ancestors also found ways to be joyful, even under the most horrific of circumstances.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good reminder that even in this process of like figuring it out, it doesn't always have to be hustle. It doesn't always
Yeah.
have to be keep going. You can pause, you can rest. And
Yeah.
that's just as helpful. I mean, for me, as someone with chronic illnesses who a fuerzas, whether I want to or not, I have to pace myself. And it's very frustrating because I have a very type A personality where I just want to, and I hyper focus. I just want to get it done. And
Yeah.
then my body's like, nope, shut down. And I'm like, oh, okay, thank you for
Yeah.
reminding me. Now I got to go and rest.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to listen to
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So listen to the cues. Our bodies tell us what we need. Speaking of figuring it out, some folks still believe this myth that traveling requires a lot of money.
Mm,
And I know from experience, sometimes traveling is cheaper than staying in the US.
100%.
And so in your case, I'm curious if you have anything to share about how to travel on a budget or how to pursue a nomadic lifestyle when you don't have wealth, independent wealth.
Yeah.
Let's say that.
Yes. 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 There have been several times where I've worked, nannying or whatever the case may be, saved up money, and then traveled on that money. And so the goal was to like make that money last as long as I could make it last. And so those were the times that I'd be budget backpacking. And so if that's something that you're interested in doing, there's plenty of resources and ways to make it happen, starting from, ways that you don't have to pay for accommodation. If that's, there's resources like World Packers, Workaway, where you can volunteer in exchange for your stay. And there's different ways of volunteering. It could be anything from like woofing and you're on a farm, or helping with social media and admin at a hotel, or they need a bartender, whatever it is. You volunteer about 20 hours or so a week. I've done everything from, a lot of it's been helping with animals because I really love animals. So I volunteered at a dog shelter in India, volunteered at a dog shelter in Thailand, helped at a like dog hotel in Croatia, just volunteered at hostels and done like front desk stuff. So many ways between those sites that you can find ways to stay in places longer and use the skills that you do have, if they're not digital nomad skills, if they're not online skills, but if you have people skills, if you worked in the service industry, if you've worked in hospitality, you can utilize those things. And they're not looking for super skilled workers, but to say you have some experience will definitely give you a leg up on other people. And I've stayed in places for like a month and you're not paying anything to stay there. So that versus what I'm paying right now in New York, I have 2 roommates and I'm paying almost $1,200 a month for rent. So yeah, a lot of times, that's why I said amen, because a lot of times it can be a lot more affordable. And even if you are going to pay rent prices, I was just in Buenos Aires and I stayed in an Airbnb for a month and I paid $600 a month. And I would say my one thing with that is if you are going to go that route, you can make sure to rent from a local and not a foreigner who's there, so that you're also continuing to support locals and the local economy and putting money back into locals' pockets. But yeah, you can find places around the world where you can find much more affordable stays. Hostels, if you're not willing to volunteer, hostels are a really great option. And I know some people are weird about like staying in dorm rooms with other people, but they also have private rooms that are going to be more affordable than staying in a hotel or than staying in an Airbnb. And it's also a great way to like meet people and make friends. So hostels are always going to be a more affordable option. And in terms of crafting a budget, say you are saving up money and you're like, okay, I'm going to go on this trip. I'm going to go to Asia, or I'm going to go to South America, or I'm going to go to Europe. Really figure out like the times of year that things are busiest, and when they're slowest, they're high and low seasons, because during low seasons, things are going to be cheaper. In Europe, specifically during high season, which is usually the summer, hostel prices can go up to like $50 a bed for a night. And that's a lot. During the fall or spring or winter, it can go down to like 15, 20, a night. So be mindful of the season that you're traveling in, because that can really impact how much you're spending when there's a lot more tourist prices go up, and know your budget. So if you've got $3,000, which you can, when I left to India, I had $3,000 in my bank account. That was it to last me as long as I could last. And I really budgeted it out. There's this app that I use, Travel Spend, and you put in like what your budget is and it'll break down on a daily basis how much you can spend. And so you put your food in there, you put your excursion that you wanted to do in there, you put your accommodation, and you make sure that you're staying on top of your budget and tracking it in that way. And in terms of food, I mean, I know we all love to travel, and there's a lot of countries like Southeast Asia. It's great for street food, and you can eat everything, in a cart on the side of the street, and it's super affordable and the food's delicious. But there's also the ability, if you're in a hostel, there's always kitchens and you can make your own food, and that saves you money as well. It's not, you don't have to go out to like fancy meals. And I think that idea, that's the one thing that like I think irks me the most about what the perceptions of travel is, that it has to be done in this really expensive way. And that's so not true, because a lot of other countries tend to be a lot more affordable than the US is. And you don't have to go to the like 5-star Michelin restaurant. You don't have to stay in the resort fancy hotel that's thousands of dollars a night. You don't have to do any of those things. There's plenty of ways to do it in so much more affordable ways. And I think that's also telling of the people who want to go on vacation, or the people who want to, travel in a different way, if they're willing to do these things. If you're traveling and you're like, okay, well, I only want to stay in a resort, or I only want to stay in a fancy hotel. Well, then these tips aren't going to help you, because, that's not, you're going to have to sacrifice, and what I've learned, sacrifice some comforts. And I've had to sacrifice some comforts in order to be able to travel for longer periods of time or experience more. But I've had the best time in every way that I've done it. Those 24-hour bus rides were not, the best time I've ever had. But, at the time I did it to be able to experience as many countries as I could. So those are some resources or things that I've done to really be able to save, and they help a lot. Definitely help a lot.
There are two things that stood out to me from what you shared right now. The first is, I'm really glad you mentioned the importance of supporting local economies and locals wherever you're traveling. I think that's a big concern when it comes down to traveling, and also being a digital nomad, is the concern over how it could negatively impact certain communities. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. Volunteering locally and supporting local owners, business owners, or also the folks who have houses, et cetera, that they might be renting out if you're staying long term or even short term. And then the other thing that you mentioned right now is the whole sacrificing some, in some way, shape, or form, like getting a little bit uncomfortable. I think that's really important, because there's so many, I would say, like US American specific amenities that we're used to having, that when you go to other countries, those might not be available. Like, I rarely ever used a drying rack in the US, and then I lived in Portugal, and I was like, well, this is my life. I have to use a drying rack for everything. And now I use a drying rack here, which is funny, because I brought that back with me.
Or there's no AC. Like, people love to go to Europe during summer and complain about how there's no AC, but this is part of traveling, that like you're not going to get all the same creature comforts that you're used to here in our comfy little lifestyle here in America. Like, that's just customary. They don't, for whatever reasons. And honestly, it's probably better environmentally. So they don't use AC. If you're going to go during the summer, it's going to be hot, and you're going to have to get used to it, So there's definitely some things.
Yeah, but it's a good reminder, because that's not what we see when we're looking at whatever's marketed about travel, is that it's a mix. It's a mix of really amazing, incredible, life-changing experiences, and some moments that are uncomfortable that are probably also life-changing.
The most life-changing, honestly.
So we're getting close to wrapping up. I want to ask you if there was any question you were hoping that I would ask you.
No, I don't think so. Not that comes to mind. I do really appreciate that because I feel really strongly about people, understanding that there are different ways to travel, or that they can, make it a reality for themselves. And so I'm just grateful that you asked things that I'm able to, share what information I do have about that.
Well, as we get close to wrapping up, I want to ask one, well, actually, technically two more questions. So the first is any other closing words of advice for folks who have this itch of pursuing a non-traditional path, of doing things a little bit different than what's expected of them? And after that, I'd love for you to just shout yourself out, how we can reach you, stay in touch, follow, support your work.
Yeah. It's always so hard to say this in a way that doesn't sound cliche or like cookie cutter of like follow your dreams, but that's not, like I don't want to say
What's Dianni's version of that?
I don't want to say that, but I think you've heard through me sharing my experience and my story that like it's not easy. And if you resonated with any parts of my story, then you've probably, you know, have seen yourself at times being like, oh, I can't do that, because that's not for me. That's for people with money, or that's for people who were born into money or have parents that can send them money. And, I know that as first gen, second gen, we were not awarded those same privileges, and there's a lot more expected of us, that we're living a very different life, and we think that we're not deserving of certain experiences or certain things. But not me. If I cry twice in this episode, I swear. But
that'll be a record on this podcast.
It'll be a record for me on any podcast, on my own podcast, like on podcasting in general. But I think like even though we weren't awarded, deserve those things even more or just as much. You deserve to enjoy this life. And if it means not going to grad school because that's not what it is that you want to do, and that's something that, has been pushed on you by your family, really consider not going if that's not for you, because you deserve to enjoy this life. If you've always wanted to go to Thailand, or you've always wanted to go to Japan, and that's just always been on your heart, and I know what it's like to be at that point where it's like nagging on your soul of like, I just want to go see the world, but feeling that voice on top of it saying like, you don't get to do that. That privilege isn't reserved for you. It is. You get to do it more than anyone else. And so don't think just because you're first gen, second gen, that you have responsibilities that you are not deserving of experiencing this life to the fullest, and you are not worthy of enjoying it, because we are not put here just to suffer and to work hard. We are put here to enjoy, and that is healing for our ancestors just as much as anything else is. That seeing you witness and experience joy is probably one of the most healing things, that can be experienced. So you go, I'm telling you right now in your ear, if you're listening with headphones on, you go and you do whatever it is that you have to do to experience the most joy you possibly can. And if that's traveling, whatever that looks like, but you deserve it. And don't let anyone tell you that you don't get to deserve, that you don't get to experience the most joy possible in this life. And that is my version of follow your dreams.
I love that. That actually like kind of inspires me.
Yeah, we
forget.
forget.
Such a rough month. It has been such a rough month for me personally,
Exactly.
and I needed that reminder too. So thank you
I'm
for
glad.
that. Now
I'm
you
so
making me
glad.
cry next.
I'm glad. We all have to be reminded right now. Joy is such a form of resilience and a form of fighting back and resistance. Like I'm going to experience joy in the face of all of this hatred. I'm going to experience joy in the face of all of this, and I deserve to experience joy. And like reminding ourselves of that like life is not meant to. I think a lot of times in the US, that life can constantly feel like struggle. Not just in the US, everywhere, but especially here, like things can feel really hard all the time. And it's like, it doesn't, yes, that is, a part of life, but that's not all it has to be. We are deserving of experiencing joy. And what is the point if we're here just to struggle the whole time and not get to like enjoy any of it? I don't want to get to the end of this and just be like, yeah, I paid my dues. I struggled the whole time. I fought and I survived. But like, when did I laugh? When did I spend time with friends? When did I, instead of being productive that one time, I went and sat with a friend and we had a chat over a coffee and like got to laugh and like cry and talk together. Like prioritize those things, schedule it in, find time for it. But that joy is so important. So I'll step off my soapbox, but That joy is so important.
On that note, how can folks follow your work and support in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah. So the podcast, if you want to come listen, is While She's Away podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can come follow me on TikTok and Instagram. I haven't been as active lately, but I will be again soon, hopefully. Sorry. On Instagram at While She's Away Pod and on TikTok at While She's Away. And come hang out with me if you have any questions about anything I shared about today, from resources to travel to how to become a freelancer to anything I discussed. I'm so happy to answer. Come slide into my DMs and happy to chat with you. So thank you.
Take her up on that offer, y'all. Dianni has personally helped me with my own podcast in more ways than you all realize. And I took up that offer. So just FYI, I think a lot of us sometimes, like, we genuinely say, hey, I'm here, like, please reach out. I'm happy to get back to you. And for listeners, and I'm a listener too, I'm a podcast listener, we sometimes get shy in actually reaching out to the people we're listening to in our ears.
Yeah.
This is just some gentle nudge to the listener.
No, yeah.
If you resonated with anything that was shared today, please reach out to us. Please reach out to Dianni. Let us know, because we love to hear from you.
I mean it. My DMs are always open, and it brings me the greatest pleasure to be able to like provide resources. You know, when people come to me and they're like, I listened to your podcast and that was so helpful, and I did this thing because I listened to that. Nothing brings me more joy than yes, you did it. So always, like you said, so happy to help. Yeah.
Also, one last thing, not to make it about me. I'm not trying to make it about me. But I have this little trophy that I don't know, y'all can't see it, but there's a trophy on my top right of my image of my wherever I'm sitting, and it's a podcast award. And I legit have to give you all the credit, because if it wasn't for you encouraging me to do it, I wouldn't have done it. I really wouldn't have. That wouldn't be there. That would just be, there would be a little plantita there instead.
You did that. I know you want to give me credit, and I did push you to apply, but you have put the years into creating this podcast. You have put the years and dedication. I know how much it takes as a solo creator to create a podcast, and you have created a beautiful product, a great product that was deserving of receiving that award. So I'm glad that I was the one to push you and tell you that your podcast is worthy of receiving a Signal Award, and that you can do that and that you deserve it. And I'm so thrilled that you won. I was so excited when I saw that, because you deserve it, and I'm glad that I was there to give you that push for it, and that it worked out, and you deserve it.
And you're next.
Yeah.
So everybody follow her podcast, follow her work, support her, because she's just as supportive of everyone else and deserves all the love. Thank you for this really amazing conversation, for being so open, honest, vulnerable. I really, really genuinely loved hearing more about you, about your story, and learning so much from you too. All the resources, it's going to be a bunch of links on the show notes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've guested on plenty of podcasts, but you have created such a beautiful space, and I've really, really, really enjoyed this conversation with you. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The second way is to get your copy of my free resource kit linked in my show notes. This kit includes tools, worksheets, and podcast playlists on all things grad school, productivity, and personal development. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @Grad School Femtoring, and on LinkedIn by searching my name. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.